Could I ask you please to take your seats so we can continue with group discussion, please? Please have a seat so we can continue with group discussion. Thank you. To present the finalists in group discussion, I would like to call Ms. Lee Anderson from ACS.
Thank you very much. I want to apologize for my pronunciation of names before I even get started. But I also want to tell the contestants that you need to sit in the order that I call you, so the first person that I call will sit in the first seat up here, okay? Okay, we will start with, from H.A.E.F, 275, Dimitris Travaias. From Yitunas, number 192, Maria Vasilia Malona. From Anatolia, number 363, Alexandros Nikolaidis Konstas. From ACS, number 71, Marilena Bitsikas. From H.A.E.F, number 272, Nikos Stravayanis. Just do it. Just. Marilena, she has to get her notes, but the door is locked. From St. Lawrence, 216, Ioana Moras Yenti. From St. Catherine's, number 30, Dimitris Selakos.
Hello, everyone. Hello. I suppose that we can start our conversation today by maybe reading the topic. Would you mind if I read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So, the magnitude of global warming and its effects are being felt worldwide. You are concerned students who understand that sustainability is the key to decreasing the impact that global warming is having and will continue to have on our lives. Your task is to A, devise new strategies for sustainable growth, and B, think of ways to motivate world leaders to more actively implement these strategies to decrease the impact of global warming for the benefit of mankind. Okay. So essentially, I would suggest that we can start off by defining the key term that is being mentioned, that is sustainability, and then moving on to dividing our time and structuring our conversation.
Before we get into that, perhaps we introduce ourselves. My name is Dimitris, personally.
I'm Marilia.
I'm Alex. Nice to meet you.
I'm Maria.
My name is Nick.
My name is Joanna.
My name is Dimitris.
Right.
And I believe that we should start actually by structuring our conversation today. And by doing that, firstly, I believe that we should start talking about possible new strategies for sustainable growth, and then move on to discuss ways to motivate leaders to actively implement these strategies worldwide and decrease the impact of global warming for the benefit of all of us.
That's
Guys,
a great
obviously-
idea.
But,
Sorry, go ahead, Maria.
Before we move on, I think we should work on time management. So maybe, say specific time, minutes that we're going to spend on the first task and then move on to the second task so that we have time also to conclude the whole conversation.
Absolutely.
So I'm suggesting maybe for the first task, we can spend about 20 minutes and then 15 minutes for the second and 5 minutes to conclude.
I'd actually agree with that idea. I think that it's
Are we okay with that?
strategy.
All right, great.
Do you think we should start first by defining some of the words?
Yeah,
Yeah,
perhaps
go
I
ahead.
have
I
a
agree with
definition
that.
for
Okay.
sustainability if everyone would accept it.
Okay, great.
Sustainability, by definition, is the idea that goods and services should be produced in ways that do not use resources that cannot be replaced and do not damage the environment. Is everyone okay with that definition?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And global warming is a gradual increase in the overall temperature of the Earth's atmosphere, generally attributed to the greenhouse effect. Do we all agree to this?
May
Yeah.
I add something to the definition of sustainability?
Sure.
We also
Yeah, cool.
consider that by sustainable, we also mean that not only are we going to help preserve the environment and what it is offering us, but we'll also ensure that by doing this, we will not reduce any of the possibilities for the future generations to live worse than we do.
Exactly.
Of
Yes,
course.
and may I add, as depleting natural resources, we are mostly focusing on fossil fuels that are defined as any combustible organic material as oil, coal, or natural gas derived from the remains of former life.
And
Are we all on the same page?
of course, and additional
Okay.
to fossil fuel, I'd also like to mention rare earths, which are generally used to create sustainable energy production, resources like solar panels, which use lithium, etc.
All right, so I think we should move on to strategies.
But before we continue, shouldn't we define the greenhouse effect since it also plays a major role? So
Go ahead.
the greenhouse effect is a phenomenon in which the atmosphere of a planet traps radiation emitted by the sun, caused by gases such as carbon dioxide, water vapor, and methane. Do we all agree to this?
Yes.
All right, great.
Now, who would like to move on?
Yeah, so about a strategy for more sustainable living that is also going to help the, combating global warming, I think we should actually revive up renewables. So that means we can use alternative energy resources like solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, bioenergy, and also something that is called wave energy. That is going to be very helpful for the countries that are near the coast and the sea because they get the energy and the energy of the wind and the wave, and in that way they are able to produce energy. So what do you guys think about that?
Yes, and boosting clean energy is the best thing that we could do at this point.
And I just wanted to point
Yes,
out before
please.
we move on, Dimitris, that I think it's important that this fact is very important since oil is going to, in the next 50 to 80 years, going to be so hard to acquire that we are going to spend more money in order to acquire it than it will give us in return. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
A resource, a renewable resource that is booming at this point in time is wind energy. So harnessing power from the wind is surely one of the cleanest and most sustainable ways to generate electricity, as it produces no toxic pollutions or global warming, which is the point that we're discussing today. And it is actually the fastest growing source of electricity in the world. So I would like to point that out too.
Obviously, and in addition to that, I'd like to mention a very innovative solution to energy production used in Oslo, where the heat from sewage water is used to produce energy, as it is generally hotter than its surround environment.
Yeah.
So what resource would that be?
It will be heat energy, in my opinion, and it can be implemented in many of the countries of the northern hemisphere, which have a major which has a major heat difference.
Yeah, basically the use of heat as energy.
Exactly.
Should we also consider what we're going to do about the LEDCs, which might not have enough money to develop technology such as wind turbines and solar panels?
I would like to suggest the use of photovoltaics that are not that costly and actually can be implemented even in developing countries and can be funded, for example, by the UN if we were to persuade them.
Yeah, and also to add up to that, maybe we can motivate people financially by providing subsidizes something that is done by Germany, and in that way we actually minimize our tax. And so more people want to buy, they're more open to alternative sources of energy. So I think generally financial motivation is very important when it comes to environment, because I don't think that many people are going to be as willing to cooperate.
Definitely.
And also,
So, yeah.
by educating people and by telling them, we can also raise awareness by like fundraisers, which could go to all these things and can pay for all the solutions that we want to provide.
Not only fundraising, but in schools as well, we should actually start teaching children the effects of global warming in much more detail so that they understand what are the causes of our planet being as it is.
Yes, definitely. But however, I do not think that we should solely focus on schools, as in developing countries and least developed countries. It's not necessary that children actually attend school.
Certainly.
Thus,
Certainly,
for
yes.
example, by having brochures or people talk to them, it might be a much more effective way to implement new strategies.
I think
I
with
love the
people
solution.
talking. Oh,
Sorry, yeah. I love the solution of informing the public, but going back to what Marilia said about creating an incentive, that it is obviously necessary for politicians to create an incentive for their citizens that helps all stakeholders cope with the problem of sustainability so that it is accepted by the general public.
So first of all, we all agree to alternative energy resources, and then maybe we can put subsidizes as a second strategy to combat for a more sustainable living. And also what I would like to add about alternative energy resources, because I didn't have the chance to, is like maybe we can also, it's very important to put alternative energy resources into factories, so that they work with alternative energy, because because they produce a lot of CO2 and it cause a lot of global warming. So I think it's very important to focus on that area too.
Okay, and sorry. Returning to our point concerning raising awareness, I believe that in that manner we can help people realize about recycling, which is avoiding the acquisition of unnecessary items that will eventually be thrown away. And some examples are for limiting purchases of what we need, or selecting products more carefully.
Exactly, Nick. I really like your point, but I think we should take a step back from individual action and go back to a more serious problem. Which
exactly, Dimitri.
I would like to point out the huge problem of deforestation. And so sustainable forestry is something needed today, which is defined, because I assume that you want to know that, as a practice of regulating forest resources to meet the needs of society and industry, while preserving the forest's health. So basically, one application of this sustainable forestry is selective logging. So basically allowing the time at removing certain trees while preserving the balance of the woodland and allowing time for new trees to grow.
Exactly, so it is also connected to Nick's point of recycling, but also on a more general level by avoiding using material that cannot be immediately recycled, by avoiding using trees and logging, but using selective logging.
I wouldn't say that it has to do with recycling. I believe that it's another sustainable strategy, another strategy that could actually help for sustainable growth.
Yeah, well, I get... Oh, go on, it's okay.
For recycling, both of you have very good points, but recycling is also another factor that we should focus on.
Absolutely, yeah, I totally agree.
So I feel like both are a problem that we
Exactly,
should
yeah.
talk
So yeah, I just wanted to clarify in our discussion, we should keep recycling and recycling apart because of their big difference. So yes, of course, I agree with the
adding
recycling.
to the industrial points, wherever using alternative energy cannot be necessarily applied, we can also resort to the use of grey water for treatment of the products and for the process of products, whereas many factories do require treatment through water, and for that drinkable water is used, whereas we could use water that, while not drinkable, can be used for the treatment of products.
Yeah.
On the point of alternative energy sources, should we also consider nuclear energy, because it doesn't produce any global warming emission?
Sorry, Iana, although it does not produce any immediate...
it does produce radioactive waste, which
produce
can harm
radioactive
the
waste,
environment.
exactly.
But if we manage to restrict that, it could be a very important energy source, especially since photovoltaics and wind turbines are not so developed to sustain whole cities at this point, the size of Manhattan.
It is true, but as we've seen from the example from Germany, whereas they have started to closing down one by one their nuclear factories, their nuclear energy production centers, it is obvious that maybe we need to strand away from nuclear energy as well.
But while they were developing, they had nuclear
Well, yes, I
power.
mean,
even
Joanna,
though-
I just wanted to say that, of course, your point is valid, and I think that for the implementation of your point, we would need to create legislation, and as we are students, I don't know if this is going to be very easy to do. Perhaps we're going to encounter
And also because
certain
of our
obstacles.
role, and because also we are students, I believe this. But another problem that we have to face that also contributes to global warming and the greenhouse effect is transportation. Because as people drive in cars and they don't use a lot of public transportation, they release a lot of fuels and gases into the air, which add to global warming and heating the environment. So what we can do is try to have some fundraisers and raise money for public transportation, and with this we can buy new equipment for public transportation, such as new trains, or fix the old ones, since a lot of people don't use public transportation because they're old.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I
Maria,
see your
great
point.
suggestion. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Maria.
So I see your point, and we also can introduce carpooling and even announce odds car plates numbers, and we can also like introduce green cars and electricity cars, more like to add up to the public transportation part. You know, so many individuals may want to use their own transportation. So maybe this could be solutions.
Exactly,
for
and
that.
as Maria pointed out correctly, we have to apply sustainability to urban areas. Green mobility, as you pointed out, so efficient urban transport is extremely fundamental to citizens' quality of life and to economic development, right? So, yet our current reliance to combustion, to internal combustion, is a major source, of air and noise pollution, and has negative impacts on both us and the environment. So it's a really important issue to get green mobility to the rise.
But Dimitri, what you're suggesting is that we do provide world leaders on the next point with a suggestion that maybe we need to improve transportation and public transport within the country so as to be more sustainable.
Yeah,
Maybe
I
we
believe
should
it is.
add
Excuse
that
me,
to
Nick.
it,
Yes,
yeah.
I believe that it is quite connected with renewable energy sources. So I would include to that if Maria agrees.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we all agreed to that alternative transportation is one of the solutions.
And
And not-
also,
Yeah.
to add on, also we can talk about like electric cars, since they also don't use that much fuel and add and contribute to climate change.
So
Not-
based on that,
I also
Maria,
mentioned that, yeah.
We can
A
also
great-
focus on traditional public modes of transport, as by ameliorating them, we're going to be able to attract more people in order to use them. Drastically, the amount of emissions that are emitted daily from cars or individual uses of modes of transport.
so generalizing this, we could just say that we suggest an improvement in technology in general, in sustainable technology, so that world leaders do provide with incentive for companies to invest more in sustainable energy production, sustainable technology.
Yeah, and,
Yes, of course. I agree.
and also about what Alexander said, I also feel it's very important to make public transportation faster, so that people are more motivated to actually use it, because like we live in a fast-paced life, so we need to have
And
like
also,
that.
many people don't use public transportation because it's so slow and the car is always faster.
Yeah.
So that's why in the beginning, when I talked about this, I said that we can have some fundraisers to raise money to get to build these new.
So
equipment,
yeah, so
which would,
basically, exactly.
encourage people to go more. to
So
public transportation.
if we could basically understand what we mean here, we basically talk about sustainability in urban areas generally, make buildings more efficient, let's say, or generally boost clean energy in the city. So basically the aim is to create the smallest possible ecological footprint and to produce the lowest quantity of pollution possible, and generally to make the city overall contribution to climate change minimal. So I believe generally if we take this as a strategy, making cities greener, we can actually achieve more.
Exactly, Dimitris. And if you allow me, guys, to trace back to our energy points, we'd also suggest a better energy distribution. And I'd like to mention the example of Crete, for example, where it has a variety of renewable resources and a variety of of wind energy production centers that does not all get consumed and could be shared with both neighboring islands, per se Cyprus, or neighboring mainland like Peloponnese.
Yeah, well,
So,
I
like,
agree
with
with
the-
you. Oh, sorry. And we can also introduce about what Dimitri said, district heating. It's something that is used in Vienna, and what they do pretty much is they take the garbage and they burn it and they filter it so that they take out all the greenhouse gases, and that way they are able to provide heat to flats and public buildings. So I think it's very important to
Yeah,
talk about
and
that.
talking about burning of waste, I just wanted to mention the example of Vienna, where they have carefully planned with specific gas control the burning of waste and the creation of the burning of waste works of art. And I believe that this is a project that should be implemented in the rest of the world, if you agree with me, Alex. Yeah.
May I also suggest making buildings as energy conservative as possible? For example, adding better insulation, for example, or photovoltaics instead of electric heating to boil the water, I mean. Or we could use, for example, the methane produced when we burn the waste for heating as natural gas.
And also, we can also do these to factories because, as Maria said before,
Yeah.
factories are a big contribution
Yeah.
to the greenhouse effect and to global warming. So we can also use a lot of renewable energy.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
And a very good,
Please go
thank you.
ahead.
And a very good example of a green company is something as a green company, Apivita. It only uses like solar energy, wind energies, and everything that it produces is eco-friendly. And also, what we can do in order to promote the products of such factories, we can actually do like a brand, like a sticker at every product, so that we motivate people to buy these products instead of the ones that are not eco-friendly.
And actually concerning that, a lot of industries have been very much interested in implementing renewable sources of energy as they tend to popularize the industry. So for example, BMW has started using a drastic amount of, and an immense amount of renewable sources of energy to create cars.
On the subject of transportation, should we also, apart from using renewable energy sources with cars, or generally transportation, try to make them as efficient as possible by, for example, making them more streamlined and aerodynamic, since that will have less resistance and thus they will need more fuel to travel?
Yeah, so you are proposing the cooperation with companies, manufacturers of cars to maybe create these new cars?
Yes, fuel-efficient cars, and generally, like boats could even be more streamlined.
Yeah. That can
So
also
like in generally the evolution of technology in this particular field?
Yes, yes.
I think we should. Do you agree that we should move on because we're done?
Yeah, well, I agree with
Yes.
you, but before we do so, I also think that we should mention their CO2 absorbing materials. So there are materials that are used to absorb CO2 and greenhouse gases and are put in many areas like the ocean, also in many industries that they're used as filters, and there are so many universities like MIT working on them, and I think it's a very good new technology that is invented, even
And
though
yes.
developing countries might have trouble getting it, we can get there with slower steps. So
Concerning
guys
your
Summing it up, we have mentioned.
Can I add
all
something?
three-
Another.
yeah, sure, go ahead.
So we know that industrial agriculture does really affects the environment in a negative way. So there is a way to sustain it. Basically, industrial agriculture has the ability, of course, to produce huge amounts of food for affordable prices. But the method of farming can be detrimental for the environment. So I would suggest that we should maybe find a new strategy for more sustainable agriculture, and for farmers maybe to minimize water use and lower the dependence on chemical pesticides and fertilizers that damage all of us and cause pollution.
And also
Would you agree?
Yeah, that also contaminate water as well as the environment and the area to grow crops. So
Exactly.
we are-
Fertilizers can be combated very easily by the use of genetically modified products, although this does not sound as the most compelling solution. It has been proven that genetically modified products have improved severely in the last decades and are no longer harmful in spite of their reputation. So in order to avoid pesticides and other chemicals, we could resort to extensive use of genetically modified products.
Okay, so I believe now that we should move on to
Yeah.
our next topic. So would anyone like to summarize?
Yeah, if you allow me to sum it up, but generally not mentioning specifics, we have mentioned all three pillars of sustainability, society by creating incentives and information, environmental resources by managing the use of non-renewable resources and using the extensive use of sustainable energy, and the economy by suggesting the investment in new technologies and new ways of transport. Anything
And
else someone would like to add?
I agree with that.
Should we also, should we also include the CO2 absorbing materials that I mentioned, or
Yes.
if you guys are okay with that?
Yeah, and agriculture as we.
Exactly.
agriculture.
Agriculture and forestry, do you believe that that's a
Exactly.
big
Yeah,
issue?
it's a very important.
Yes, because it also contributes
Which
to
do I believe
deforestation. which is a
Exactly,
very big
deforestation and agriculture are really big issues. So I think we
Yeah.
should
They
include
do believe
And also
that,
sorry,
sorry, they do, I believe, however, fall under the renewable materials and renewable sources.
I
like,
wouldn't exactly
say,
say so, but
logging.
if all of you agree, I'm fine.
Well, I totally agree with you, because farmers are the ones that are using more pesticides, and it's very bad for the environment. And I think it's a very important point, and we should point it out.
And also.
Okay, so
they-
should we just summarize it that way? Sustainable energy, 1. Sustainable agriculture, 2. Sustainable forestry, 3. And this, an application to urban areas, if you all agree with that.
Can you please repeat, because I didn't hear you
Exactly,
in the
yeah.
microphone?
Sustainable energy,
Yeah.
sustainable forestry and agriculture, and application of the sustainability to urban areas.
Well, yes, of course. We will include all the rest of the points.
Exactly,
that
yeah,
were
exactly,
mentioned.
and application of urban areas, because we
Yeah.
just mentioned them.
And also about the, I didn't think you mentioned the economic factor, like
Yeah, okay,
providing
so,
subsidizes
moving
and
on.
raising awareness.
Exactly,
Moving on
yeah.
to the next point. I
All
believe.
right, so I think we should, it's time for us to move on.
Yeah, we could move on to...
So,
Would someone, like to suggest ways to convince world leaders as to why they should invest in said solutions?
well, I think that generally leaders are not very sensitive when it comes to the environment. So if we show them the economic benefits of helping the environment then I think they will be very motivated to actually engage and provide and finance such activities. So what do you guys think?
So again, yeah, I agree. So we should raise awareness and educate them so they can invest in.
Well, I
Exactly.
think
And
that's,
if you allow me to be a bit blunt here, we all know that obviously world leaders do have a grave concern for voters and their positions. So if we convince them that there is incentive in investing in sustainable energy and sustainable solutions, they will be guaranteed more voters and thus a guaranteed place in the same.
And here I would like to mention the example of the United States President Donald Trump, who currently is not accepting the necessity to implement sustainable policies. And I think our focus could be towards perhaps as Dimitris you mentioned before, notifying him of the circumstances.
And in addition to that, it can actually really help industries and world leaders in the sense that they can popularize either countries or industries, which have a great effect on the sales that are happening. And in addition to that, one of the basic notions is that the fact that renewable sources of energy do not have a set price. It's based on the investment that is being made by the country or the industry. Thus, there are no fluctuations. So, for example, as you might have observed, coal prices are increasing drastically each year. So by implementing the use of renewable sources of energy, they're going to have a much more stable
Economy.
a much more stable
Exactly.
economy.
That's what we need to show through probably a campaign, maybe to show world leaders what can be done. Possibly a cooperation of companies and organizations that actually believe in this big dream and have this ambition of a greener planet and a better economic development with longer-term benefits.
Well,
Exactly,
I definitely
Dimitris,
get your point.
Sorry,
Thank you.
exactly, Dimitris, on top of what Alex said, which is the immediate financial benefits of investing in sustainable technology, there is also the non-immediate benefits, which are basically the gain of public trust, as today's public would rather prefer to purchase goods that have been produced through sustainable means.
And also,
To add to Alex's point, what you told about that we could have a campaign, this money that we could raise through these campaigns can actually go to all the new strategies that we set for sustainable growth.
And especially to help the developing countries as well that are in a great need of renewable sources of energy and do not have the funds to actually implement such projects.
yeah, I definitely agree with you. And also, I think that under the umbrella of raising awareness and informing the leaders, we should also provide good examples of leaders that care about the environment. And such an example is the leader of Sweden that what he does is they decided to recycle garbage by burning it, and they recycle the waste. And that way, they save about 99% of household waste, which is very impressive and can be a motivation for other leaders, since Sweden has come to a point to buy garbage from the EU in order to achieve that goal.
It is very impressive.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And I wanted also to add here that we should remind leaders how bad it would be to destroy the three pillars of sustainability, as Dimitris mentioned before, which are society, environment, and economy. And I believe, especially concerning the environment, we have to, as we said before, raise awareness.
We could also show them how, in fact, on the long term, if they destroy the environment, they're losing because they're destroying all their energy sources.
So all the positive effects of helping us.
Exactly.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
now we're going back a bit to the research that we can do in order to do campaigns, and so we're leaders what is actually good for them, their countries, and the whole planet.
Yes,
Exactly, and
there are-
also on top of what both Dimitris and Marilia mentioned, with creating the incentive for the public and their citizens and their voters, I'd like to mention the example of right here in Greece, where we have the low tariff electricity, which for certain hours of the day and night, the electricity's price is decreased because there is excess electricity that can be used, and therefore the public has decreased price to pay for energy.
I totally understand your point, but how do you think that this is a way to motivate?
This creates incentive for the citizens to use the excess electricity so that it is not wasted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so
So
We could also sort of show them how much the pollution they produce costs actually to clean up again, and compare it to how much money they actually spend on the fuels, and then show them that they're
Well,
not
I
gaining
agree with your point definitely, but I also think that it's included when we talked about the economy and show them the economic
Yes.
aspect of the environment. So
Yes.
okay,
Great.
so
Yes, of course.
does anybody have anything else?
I would like to add something. Maybe we could, as I previously said, find ways to discuss with big companies and other organizations, and go to where leaders, not just as one organization or one company, but all together, in order to show them that how strong we are and how all together we can achieve something like that. So do you think that maybe a cooperation could help us more in motivating world leaders?
Exactly,
Yes,
so we're
and
going
also-
back. No, Maria, go on.
And also, we can go with like NGOs that also help climate change, that
Exactly,
to
yeah.
also so they can add and talk to the world.
Yes, so both Maria and Dimitris, we're going back to the financial point as to how investment from great and bigger companies can improve the financial situation in a country, and therefore we will be able to convince world leaders easier, correct?
Correct. We shall not forget that all companies are profit maximizers. So by having these incentives, we can actually have a win-win situation here. Do you agree, Ioana?
Yes, certainly.
It's like, for example, good for the corporations, as they will make more profit, increase their profit, and for the environment and
Exactly.
for our cause.
Yes, because we are running out of fossil fuels anyway. We will run out eventually. So by motivating companies to switch, then they will be able to both gain a lot of money, because on the long term, actually, the energy they will produce will be very cheap, and also not harm the environment.
And generally, if they see how much, as we talked about, the positive aspects, the economic and the environmental, that it has to provide for their countries, I think that they will want to invest.
Well, and also think that maybe we should provide some like sort of some financial motivation in a way that if a leader engages in activity that is not eco-friendly, like let's take for example Iran that is engaging in nuclear activity that might be, of course, like good for the environment, but it cannot. And at the same time, it's not that good for the people
It's
around
not
them.
as
So
sustainable.
America is making Iran pay taxes for what they do. So maybe we can, like, it also falls under the umbrella of economy, but I think it's also
I wouldn't
important.
entirely say to make them pay taxes because they are in a very bad economic situation, and I would suggest giving them aid in order to improve their technology and leave behind nuclear technology for cheaper alternatives such as hydroelectric or solar energy,
Or renewable.
Yeah.
generally renewable.
And of course,
energy.
we can use Dimitri's point about cooperating with big
Businesses.
corporations. Yes, businesses. Thank you. About funding and helping these underdeveloped countries. And I would also like to mention that we can create petitions, mainly concerning the state in general. But I believe that if we create them and raise enough votes, the politicians will be able to recognize this and accept this, and for example, cooperate with programs such as the program of the European Commission about supporting cities, and I think that this is a way that we can achieve this.
Should we
Exactly.
start off with a more local program because we are students after all, and then
Yes,
sort
that's
of
why
continue?
I proposed this.
And on top of all the financial and public awareness solutions that have been proposed, we could perhaps do basically, if I may, ensure the supports we could provide with already existing examples, such as the example of Europe, which does provide 105 billion euros a year in green projects and sustainable projects under the cohesion policy funds from 2011, which do prove that sustainable solutions are a thing and are achievable through
And Dimitris, as you rightly mentioned, Europe does a lot to preserve resources and make the world a better place. So I think we could take this a step further and maybe persuade the European Union for countries like Greece that are in a huge debt right now, Spain, Italy, to maybe if they implement these green policies, that they can maybe cut down their debts a bit.
And also the economic factor, since we talked about
Exactly.
in all these ways, how the economic factor always relates back to it. So I feel like the world leaders will most likely want to talk about the economic factor and how it benefits their country.
And then one world leader might learn from the next, and overall it will spread.
So it's going to be like a chain reaction.
Yes. So
However,
they see the financial profit of it, it will probably.
However, for countries that are in debt, we will need some sort of financial aid, for example, from the UN, that is going to help them to implement such, for example, factories to produce those renewable sources of energy, as they might not be able to implement them on their own with their own financial state at the
Possibly.
moment.
Well,
It
and
does
I-
depend, however,
oh.
Alex, where the debt comes from. How, for example, the UN cannot help fund the Greek debt, for instance, as it is mostly to EU countries, and that would be out of the UN protocol, for
So I
instance.
feel like we should sum up. So
but,
we talked about
well, sorry.
Do you have something to add, Mario?
Yeah, also think that the countries that are in debt, that their financial situation is going to improve since they're going to engage in eco-friendly activity because they can be benefit financially, as we mentioned above. So I think we should now summarize the debate.
Summarize.
So we
Okay.
talked about, as students, new strategies for sustainable growth, and we talked about renewable energy we could use and how we can implement this in both factories and the new ways of transportation. We talked about raising awareness about this topic, deforestation, energy distribution, CO2 absorbing materials. Anybody want to add?
Well,
Yes, about
more-
the industrial agriculture that we talked about
And
the new
sustainable houses.
strategies. And yes,
Yeah, we
sustainable
could take this
greenhouses.
as for urban areas application of sustainability in general. Maybe I think that's better if you all agree.
Yeah.
And then we talked about the ways world leaders could how world leaders, how we can motivate them to take part in these actions. We talked about how we can educate them for all of the positive attributes that this does, such as the economic factor and also how it will help their environment. We also talked about implementing renewable energy and also help. And we talked about, yeah, anybody want to?
And
Yes,
also
so-
we talked, oh, sorry. We also talked about raising, at the second task, we also talked about raising awareness to the public, because if a leader sees that the citizens are interested and they are the voters, so he's going to be more able to engage in eco-friendly activity too.
And also how this is a chain reaction, since we said how the UN can help us since this is helping in
Yeah.
Europe, and how if one country and world leader sees that this is helping in another country, that they will try to do the same.
Yeah, and
So
show-
about convincing world leaders, it all basically breaks down to gaining public acceptance and financial and environmental development for the
Absolutely.
nation.
Which is
Exactly.
basically sustainability.
Exactly.
That's what we should do. That we should show
Public acceptance.
incentives, economical, political, and environmental.
Exactly.
Okay, so if anyone else doesn't have anything to add,
It was very
I believe that we have finished with this wonderful discussion. So
Thank you,
Thank you very
everyone.
much,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
thank you.
I would like to thank our judges, Ms. Cleo Tsurgu from Moraiti Schools, Mr. Elias Tezapsidis from Mandulidi Schools, and Ms. Valerie Bodington from Campion School. At this time, we will have a very, very short break. Please be back. We will begin debates exactly at 1:30. Exactly 1:30, please. Thank you.